Boeing CEO was wrong about SpaceX. Not a little wrong. He went on CNBC in 2017 and promised the first person on Mars would ride a Boeing rocket, and while SpaceX has become NASA's operational workhorse for crewed flights to the station. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about that prediction. He wasn't stupid, and technically, he isn't wrong about Mars yet. December 7th, 2017. Boeing's chief executive is sitting down with Jim Cramer on CNBC, and Cramer asks him a question that sounds like a joke, but isn't. Who's going to get a man on Mars first, you or Elon Musk? Dennis Muilenburg doesn't hedge. He says he firmly believes the first person to set foot on Mars will get there on a Boeing rocket. Musk saw it, and he replied with 2 words, "Do it." Boeing's own account came back with 2 words of its own. Game on. Remember that. We're coming back to it. Now, in 2017, this was not a ridiculous thing for Muilenburg to say. I want to be really clear about that, because the way this story usually gets told is that some out-of-touch executive mouthed off and got humiliated. That's not what happened. What happened is more interesting than that, and honestly, a little more unsettling. Because look at the resume. Boeing built the first stage of the Saturn V, the piece that got Apollo off the pad. Boeing was the prime contractor on the International Space Station. When Muilenburg said, a Boeing rocket, he wasn't even talking about something Boeing would sell you. He was talking about NASA's Space Launch System, the heavy-lift rocket Boeing was building the core stage for. He just told Cramer it would take its first test flight in 2019 and loop around the moon. That's the part people miss. His claim wasn't really, Boeing is better than SpaceX. It was, the way this industry works. The government builds the big rocket and we build it for them. That had been true for 60 years. He'd said almost the exact same thing a year earlier, in October 2016, at a conference in Chicago hosted by The Atlantic, a conference Boeing itself sponsored. And the timing there is not an accident. A week before, Musk had stood on a stage in Guadalajara and laid out a plan to put people on Mars with a ship that didn't exist yet, on a timeline of 2024-2025. Muilenburg was answering that, and Mars was almost a throwaway line in that Chicago talk. The bulk of it was a much wider pitch, dozens of commercial destinations in orbit, hypersonic aircraft crossing the planet in a couple of hours, an entire near-Earth economy with Boeing sitting in the middle of it. He wasn't a man who didn't believe in commercial space. He believed in it enthusiastically. He just assumed Boeing would be the one building it. Here's the thing that really tells you how the world looked back then. 2 years before that, in September 2014, NASA had picked its 2 commercial crew companies. Boeing got about $4.2 billion. SpaceX got about $2.6 billion. Same job, same destination, same space station. Boeing got roughly 60% more money. That gap wasn't a mistake or a favor. NASA looked at both bids and concluded Boeing's approach was worth more, and NASA's own Inspector General has since said the agency was overconfident in Boeing's design. Partly because Boeing was leaning on heritage systems, hardware and methods that had flown before. Which sounds like exactly the right reason to trust somebody. So if you're Muilenburg in 2017, the math is simple. You've been doing this since Apollo. You got the bigger contract. You're building the government's moon rocket. Of course you win. And there was already a crack in it if you knew where to look. In May of 2016, Boeing had quietly pushed its first crewed flight from 2017 to 2018. Here's what he actually missed. It wasn't Mars. While Boeing was doing it the traditional way, get it right the first time, qualify everything, fly when it's ready, SpaceX was doing something that looked reckless and turned out to be a superpower. They were landing boosters. First successful landing, December 2015. First time they flew a used one again, March 2017. 9 months before that Cramer interview. Every one of those landings was data. Every reflight was a test. SpaceX wasn't smarter than Boeing. It was iterating faster than Boeing, in public, on hardware, over and over. And it turned out that iteration speed was worth more than 60 years of institutional memory. That's the shift Muilenburg didn't see. And to be fair, almost nobody in the industry saw it either. Then the timeline just grinds. December 2019, Starliner's first uncrewed test flight. Software problems keep it from reaching the station. Boeing takes a $410 million charge, May 2022. It finally makes it up there, uncrewed. June 5th, 2024. Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams launch on Starliner. It's a test flight with a minimum duration of 8 days. On the way up, 5 thrusters fail and 5 helium leaks develop. The capsule docks. And then, it just sits there for 3 months while engineers on the ground argue about whether it's safe to put 2 humans back inside it. The answer they landed on was no. Starliner came home empty. NASA classified the flight as a Type A mishap, its most serious category. Wilmore and Williams stayed on the station for 286 days and came home on a SpaceX Dragon. 8 days, 286. And the money is brutal because it's a fixed-price contract, which means Boeing eats the overruns. Boeing has recorded more than $2 billion in losses on Starliner out of its own pocket. And in its own SEC filing, the company warned there was ongoing risk that similar losses would keep coming. And Starliner isn't an isolated failure, which is the part I find genuinely revealing. Boeing has been bleeding on fixed-price development contracts across the board. The KC-46 tanker, the T-7A trainer, the MQ-25 drone, and the Air Force One replacement, where losses passed $3 billion this past July. The pattern in all of them is the same. Bid aggressively low to win, then absorb the overruns. That works when you're confident you can execute on schedule. Boeing's whole competitive identity was built on being the company that could. Meanwhile, SpaceX got human-rated in November 2020 and has just been flying ever since. And the cadence is the thing that's hard to appreciate from the outside. Falcon 9 hit its 60th orbital launch of 2026 back in May. Not 60 total, 60 in 5 months. Where does it stand right now? A NASA Inspector General report from June 30th of this year put Starliner's certification at 2027 at the earliest, with the propulsion and helium problems still unresolved, and openly questions whether it gets certified at all. Boeing's next flight isn't even crewed. It's a cargo run, and it doesn't have a firm date. NASA cut its Boeing order from 6 flights down to 4 in late 2025, and this past May, NASA filed to hand 6 more crew missions straight to SpaceX with no competition, and the paperwork gave the reason in plain language: technical issues and schedule delays encountered by Boeing. That brings SpaceX's crew contract to somewhere around $6.6 billion. The company that was offered $2.6. There's also a clock on all of this that nobody talks about. The space station gets deorbited around 2030. NASA flies roughly 2 crew rotations a year, so even in the best case, cargo flight late this year, certification review, crew rating, first operational mission, Boeing is looking at maybe 3 to 5 flights total before the destination it spent 12 years trying to reach stops existing. The program has already cycled through leadership. The vice president running Starliner was replaced in early 2025 by the man who'd run it a decade earlier. I should mention that Muilenburg left Boeing in December 2019, and that had nothing to do with any of this. He was ousted after the 737 MAX crashes, which killed 346 people. Different story, vastly more serious, and I'm not going to pretend the two are connected. Now, let me be fair to him on the actual claim, because there's a version of this video that cheats here, and I don't want to make it. Muilenburg is not wrong about Mars yet. Nobody has been to Mars. Starship has never carried a human being anywhere. Musk's Mars timelines have slipped repeatedly. He was saying 2024 in 2016, and here we are. If you want to be strict about it, the bet Muilenburg actually made is still open. And the rocket he was talking about flew. Artemis 1 went around the moon in late 2022 on a space launch system with a Boeing-built core stage. It was about 3 years later than the 2019 he promised Kramer, but it happened. That thing exists. So he wasn't wrong about the destination. He was wrong about the ground under his feet. While he was talking about Mars in the 2030s, Boeing was losing low Earth orbit. Not the glamorous part, the routine part, getting people 250 miles and bringing them back, on schedule, over and over. That's the contract that turned into the business. I keep coming back to one question on this, and I'd like to know where you land. Did Muilenburg lose because Boeing got worse, or because the definition of a good aerospace company changed and nobody sent him the memo? Comments, please. I don't think there's a clean answer. And if this is the kind of thing you want more of, the confident predictions that aged strangely, subscribing helps a lot. Okay, back to those 2 words. Game on. Boeing tweeted that in December 2017, And it was a joke the way corporate accounts joke. But it was also a real thing to say, because in 2017, both of those companies were doing the same job with the same customer. 9 years later, one of them flies every American astronaut who reaches the space station and is worth more than most countries' economies. The other one has a capsule in a hangar waiting on a cargo flight with no launch date, more than $2 billion of its own money gone, and a certification review it may never get to. The game did go on. It just stopped being the game Boeing thought it was playing.